Chapter 10. The captain of the Thesian guard drifted aimlessly, powerless, as he drew nearer to the gaping rift of despair. His eyes were locked onto the scene unfolding below. They were unwilling spectators to a fierce struggle, forced to watch as an orc in a frenzied rage battled against the serpentine dragon, pushing it back. For how long, he wondered. A shiver ran through his heart as the weight of his misjudgment sank in, spurred by the dragon's mocking taunts. The creature swelled to monstrous proportions, its teeth gleaming dangerously sharp, and its scales as dark as the depths of midnight. It seemed to have gotten stronger, and it was his fault and miscalculation. The situation felt utterly foreign, and the formidable archmage Nicholas Granfry was nowhere to be seen.
Captain! What are your orders, sir?
One soldier ventured, struggling to draw closer. He was a lieutenant, one of the city's few remaining officers, standing out in his formal attire, which bore little armor. The captain, in contrast, was a different breed. His garb was meant to shine with badges of honor and elegance, yet his heart belonged to the battlefield, a place that never truly left his spirit.
Captain, are you all right?
The lieutenant pressed again, as he managed to reach the captain's shoulder and gripped with urgency. The firm squeeze jolted the captain from his reverie.
I'm fine, Triggs. We've fought side by side through many struggles. You know how I get during difficult battles,
he replied, meeting his lieutenant's concerned gaze.
Have you come up with a strategy yet, Kroll?
Lieutenant Triggs inquired while scanning the faces of their remaining soldiers. Panic was etched across most of them, and the earlier blast from the dragon didn't help. Some of their comrades were blasted into the rift, their screams echoing in the air like a haunting memory. Captain Kroll gritted his teeth in frustration and found it hard to meet Triggs's gaze.
For the first time in a long time, I don't have a plan,
Captain Kroll said with hesitation. He felt ashamed. His soldiers relied on him to end this chaos around them, and in the end, he was useless. Suddenly, a voice spoke up beside both soldiers, spooking them.
Perhaps I can be of assistance.
An older, withered voice chimed in. Both soldiers immediately went into a battle stance, causing the troops to as well. Suddenly, the air shifted in front of the two commanding officers. Nicholas Granfry appeared out of nowhere, clutching his staff and breathing heavily.
There's no need for alarm,
Nicholas said with a weary wave of his hand. Captain Kroll blinked in disbelief, unable to trust his own vision.
Nicholas Granfry, you're alive!
Lieutenant Triggs exclaimed, his voice brimming with joy. A wave of exhilaration washed over the squad of soldiers behind him, their arms and swords raised in jubilant celebration at their lieutenant's words. A flicker of hope ignited in the hearts of all who listened. Captain Kroll extended his arm, palm open and flat, signaling for silence among his troops. Instantly, the cheers subsided, and the crowd stood ready, attentive to their commander's voice.
I can't fathom how you made it through, but I'm grateful you did. A scout observing the earlier aerial battle reported seeing you get struck down by the dragon.
I was indeed hit. That's partly why I'm in this state now, but that's not the pressing matter at hand. I need your assistance to expel this dragon from our world.
Nicholas turned to face the rest of the soldiers.
I require everyone's strength to save our fellow citizens and protect our realm.
The soldiers exchanged glances with one another, each half expecting to anticipate Nicholas's next words, but no one dared to interrupt his heartfelt plea.
How are we going to help in this condition?
Captain Kroll asked, pointing to his floating squad of soldiers drifting in different directions.
No need to fret about that. Bookrock must have disrupted the dragon's focus, causing the spell to wear off. As we speak, it's getting weaker by the second. The landing part might be an issue, but at the rate the spell is fading worse, case might be a broken bone.
As Nicholas said that, everyone around could see they started falling at a slow rate. The soldiers' faces lit up with delight.
So, how are we to help someone as powerful as you?
Lieutenant Triggs asked as he looked at his sword.
We barely feel like we did anything to the dragon with our barrage of arrows and spells.
This dragon is unlike anything we have ever encountered or fought before,
Nicholas said as he began floating closer to the soldiers.
Traditional means won't do in this battle. Captain Kroll, I'm sure you already noticed what your little attack did to the dragon.
Kroll grimaced as he thought to himself. Nicholas turned to the rest of the soldiers and raised his voice.
We have one chance to expel the dragon before it fully anchors itself to this world.
Kroll nodded gravely, his expression a storm of concern as he took a moment to absorb the varied reactions from his soldiers. As he scanned the faces before him, he was struck by the contrast of feeling present. Many stood tall, shoulders back, radiating a fierce resolve and determination, while others seemed almost blank, their eyes wide and uncomprehending, as if caught in the midst of a daunting nightmare they could hardly fathom. It was a moment heavy with the weight of their shared fate.
Then tell us, what is it that you require from us?
He asked, his voice steady, despite the turmoil of emotion brewing within. Nicholas surveyed the remaining fragments of their small army.
Half of the mages will concentrate their powers on reversing the mana flowing from that rift,
He announced decisively, a spark of conviction igniting in his chest.
We need to trigger a pulling reaction. Even now, I can feel our world's mana becoming dangerously saturated with wild energy, a chaotic force that could spell doom for us all. Meanwhile, the other half of our mages will be tasked with maintaining distractions for the beast, launching random magical assaults to keep it momentarily confused.
Kroll's eyes widened in disbelief as the ominous implications of Nicholas's plan settled in.
And what do you propose for my soldiers? Do you expect us to charge out and meet our doom? That creature grows stronger with every ounce of mana it consumes.
His fierce gaze bore into Nicholas, his grip tightening around the hilt of his sword as if drawing strength from it. Nicholas met his gaze, his voice tinged with the weight of grim acceptance.
It is a grim sacrifice. I won't pretend otherwise. I need your men to engage the dragon on the ground, to keep its attention fixed on them. It can't know of our plan till the trap is set.
His heart felt leaden as he continued.
I won't sugarcoat it. This is less an offense and more a desperate, suicidal charge. The time they can buy us will be our lifeline, the key to pulling off something of this magnitude. The mages need all the time they can muster to make this work.
Captain Kroll held Nicholas's gaze, searching for any flicker of deceit, but he found only hard, unyielding truth reflected back at him. He felt a sickening churn in his stomach, but also an undeniable pull of loyalty to the men who had stood beside him through countless trials. Just then, Lieutenant Triggs broke the heavy silence.
So, essentially, you're expecting us to serve as cannon fodder for this mission?
His voice carried an edge of bitter disbelief. Nicholas paused for a moment, letting the heavy silence settle like a shroud over the gathering. Murmurs began to ripple through the ranks of soldiers, a range of tones and questions mingling in the charged atmosphere. Yet a singular, haunting truth emerged from the chaotic murmurs, a notion shared among all living beings. No one desires to willingly trespass into the jaws of death. Turning back to his men, Captain Kroll raised his voice, cutting through the rising tide of uncertainty.
Take a moment to reflect on the creature we face,
He commanded, his tone imbued with a seriousness that drew the attention of every soldier.
This is an apex predator, superior in its magic, a being with no equal in our world. We stand at a precipice, the opportunity to become the heroes of our country, our families, and one we ourselves believe we truly are. You are the defensive wall against a force that could usher in the apocalypse. Hold your heads high, Take pride in knowing you are standing against a ravenous beast that seeks to devour our world.
With a fierce emphasis, Kroll raised his sword high above his head, the glint of metal reflecting the dim light around them as a symbol of defiance. His soldiers mirrored his resolve, lifting their weapons as one, a chorus of clashing steel ringing through the air. In that galvanizing moment, Nicholas felt a surge of hope, a glimmer of possibility that they might just have a fighting chance. Just then, the spell they were under began to fade at long last, and one by one, the soldiers began to drop towards the ground. A wave of relief washed over them as they realized, somewhat fortuitously, that they were only about 10 feet away from solid ground. Every one of the soldiers knew in their hearts it was now time to take back the city. In the distance, Bukrok resembled a ferocious creature on a rampage. Positioned on the dragon's head, he swung his battle hammer down with relentless fury, each strike reverberating through the massive beast's body. Yet, the dragon, clearly annoyed, retaliated with a powerful swipe of its gigantic claw, sending Bukrok hurtling through several buildings and unleashing a cloud of dust and debris in his wake. The minor wounds on the dragon's hide quickly faded, but the previously damaged eye now bore down on Bukrok with an ominous glare. As the dragon prepared to unleash another devastating breath attack, it was abruptly interrupted by a hail of arrows. Jakwawe swooped in, launching a flurry of arrows aimed at the dragon's eyes, nostrils, and gaping mouth. The beast roared with rage, momentarily blinded once again. Just then, Jakwawe felt an amassing weight pressing heavy in the area he was flying in near the dragon. It was unbearable in pressure. He felt his body slam into the ground, and the area around the dragon turned into a giant crater. Just then, Nicholas and his unit of soldiers finally reached the area where Bukrok had landed. He lay several buildings away, bleeding heavily, his labored breaths punctuated by the sounds of choking, most likely on his own blood.
Bukrok!
Nicholas shouted, panic etched across his face. The orc kept his gaze firmly fixed on the dragon, unwavering despite the odds against him. Nicholas was hardly surprised by Bukrok's fighting spirit. The orc likely intended to fight until the dragon was defeated first. Approaching with purpose, Nicholas raised his staff toward Bukrok.
Melentradala,
he intoned, and a swirling green aura enveloped Bukrok, easing his labored breath. Before Nicholas had a chance to speak, Bukrok sprang to his feet, a fierce growl escaping his lips.
Cast it again,
Bukrok commanded with unyielding determination.
Cast a healing spell. You're all ready.
Nicholas started, only to be cut off.
No, not that. I want the strength spell.
Bukrok growled, his eyes still fixed on the enemy.
I've already cast that spell before. It takes a tremendous toll on your body. Your muscles are being pushed to their breaking point,
Nicholas warned.
I don't care. I'm already broken. Cast it again.
Bukrok bellowed, his fury evident as he moved closer to Nicholas, foam gathering at his mouth.
Tarnokus.
Nicholas relented. No sooner had he spoken than Bukrok was barreling toward the dragon once more. The spell amplified his strength fivefold, and now, combined with the previous enchantment, he was operating at 10 times his normal capacity. Nicholas couldn't help but wonder just how much more powerful Bukrok had become. With a resigned sigh, Nicholas turned to Captain Kroll.
It's time. Kroll, lead your men and support them. Good luck.
Without hesitation, Kroll acknowledged with a nod and drew his weapon.
Follow me,
he shouted, his soldiers rallying together like a swarm of furious bees. Hundreds surged forward, blades raised high, spirits soaring. The dragon, recovering from the last onslaught, turned to face the approaching horde. Leading the charge were Bukrok, Captain Kroll, and Lieutenant Triggs. The dragon snorted and, in a moment of fury, swung its massive tail, demolishing nearby buildings and sending debris crashing into the advancing soldiers. Many fell, some instantly cut down or trapped beneath the wreckage, but still, the relentless tide pressed on. As the soldiers marched further, The weight of the dragon's gravity magic bore down upon them with increasing intensity. Once Bukrok was within striking distance, he leaped into the air, practically soaring. The dragon, Yorntinak, noticed him and swung a colossal claw. In a surprising twist, Bukrok countered with his hammer, generating a shockwave that momentarily stunned both Yorntinak and the soldiers. This unexpected move allowed Bukrok to leap away from the dragon's grasp and dart around to aim for its maw once more. His newfound speed took Yorntinak by surprise, and Bukrok unleashed a devastating horizontal strike, knocking the dragon off balance. The soldiers' morale soared, igniting a frantic race among them to be the first to land a blow. The effects of the gravity magic wore off immediately after the strike, and the soldiers quickened their pace. Nicholas observed as Bukrok charged headlong into the fray, delivering a powerful strike while the determined soldiers surged forward like a stampede, undaunted by the peril that loomed ahead. Turning to the mages accompanying him, Nicholas met their hopeful eyes. Despite their eagerness, their lack of experience compared to Nicholas cast a shadow of uncertainty over them.
All right. Those of you with excess mana, go assist the soldiers. The rest, who are drained, stay with me.
Nicholas ordered. He tapped his staff on the ground to draw their attention. Half of the mages quickly summoned flying spells and took to the skies, joining the soldiers.
Sir, many of us have used up nearly all our stored mana. How are we going to assist with the rift without it?
One mage inquired. He didn't bother trying to hide exhaustion.
Relax. It's actually an advantage that many of you are low on mana right now. An empty plate at a buffet is far more useful than one that's already full.
Nicholas remarked, a knowing smile creeping across his face. With a deep inhale, he drew in the air and paused, momentarily suspending the moment. The other mages exchanged bewildered glances, their expressions a blend of curiosity and uncertainty. Just as one was about to voice a question, Nicholas released a torrent of warm breath. As the air flowed past his lips, a single word slipped out softly.
Yinro.
In an instant, a flawless replica of Nicholas materialized before him, emerging as the steam fully took shape. The mages exchanged excited whispers, captivated by the awe-inspiring spell that had just unfolded before their eyes. While Nicholas would usually relish the chance to boast and impart his knowledge of this spell to the younger mages, urgency was pressing upon him, and his foremost priority was ensuring their survival through this crisis. He gestured towards his own doppelganger and instructed,
Follow his lead. I'll support the soldiers on the field against the dragon. The fate of our world depends on you all.
With those words, Nicholas began to chant,
Aleri.
Just as he was preparing to take flight, he felt the bitter taste of blood rise in his throat. He swiftly wiped his mouth, intending to ascend into the sky, but then froze for a moment, looking at his hand. A concerned voice broke the tension.
Sir Nicholas, are you all right?
The young mage's eyes reflected his concern, but Nicholas waved him off nonchalantly as he pulled a handkerchief from his inner pocket to wipe his hand.
I'm perfectly fine. Just a bit fatigued,
he replied. Before any further inquiries could arise, he soared into the air, leaving the ground behind. The clone looked at the mages and gestured to the rift in the sky.
We have a task ahead of us, but our time is limited. Is there anyone among you who knows any absorption spells?
Nicholas's clone inquired, his voice filled with curiosity and a hint of urgency. The atmosphere around him felt tense as the other mages exchanged glances, uncertainty etched on their faces. The city offered only the most basic of magic classes, and many of the more seasoned practitioners had either vanished or met gruesome ends in the ongoing chaos.
All right, no need to panic. We'll just have to take a bit more time to get it right,
the clone stated, although a weary expression creased his features, hinting at the strain of the situation. Meanwhile, amidst the clamor of battle, Bukrok fought like a wild creature. With raw energy and primal ferocity, he was hitting, throwing, punching, and kicking with such relentless determination that it was as if he were channeling the fierce spirit of the storm itself. The dragon looming above was having no easy task keeping Bukrock at bay, all the while maintaining vigilance against the stealthy assaults of Jakwawe, who, despite his severe injuries, pressed on undeterred. Every time he spotted an opening, he released a precisely aimed arrow that struck the dragon with calculated timing, providing Bukrock with necessary support. The beast's wounds, though serious, would heal even if struck in vital areas, yet each injury presented an opportunity for Bukrock and their fellow fighters. The dragon unleashed gravity magic once again, and it caused everyone in the vicinity to lift into the air, defying the ground below them. Amidst the pandemonium, Yorntinak turned and, with a swift motion of one massive claw, scooped up an entire building as if it were little more than a handful of mud. He hurled this makeshift projectile at Bukrock and the soldiers flanking him. In response, Bukrock instinctively positioned his hammer defensively, but the soldiers nearby whimpered in panic, fear straining their features. Just moments before the debris would have crushed them, a colossal wall of mud, 5 feet thick and soaring up to 30 feet high, sprang forth from the ground, rising as a barrier in front of Bukrock. Yorntinak began to scan for a magic user. His gaze abruptly locked onto the sky where Nicholas was hovering. A deep, menacing growl erupted from the dragon's throat, reverberating ominously as it sneered in recognition.
You again?
It spat.
I thought you died already.
Not yet, dragon.
Nicholas said with a scoff.
I'm a little harder to kill than I might seem.
As the great beast stared intently at Nicholas, it paused, sniffing the air as if it sensed something beyond the immediate conflict. The dragon turned its enormous body slowly until its attention was fixed upon the northern forest towards the royal capital.
I can smell it.
The dragon mused, a twisted grin forming on its savage visage.
You have descendants. They're nearby, aren't they? Perhaps a visit is in order.
A chill shot through Nicholas's heart, but he quickly pushed aside the creeping fear that threatened to overwhelm him. He had no time to engage with the beast's taunts. Instead, he focused intently, raising a hand to draw the dragon's attention for a different purpose. In a flash, an arrow from Jakwawe surged through the air, aimed directly at the dragon's face. Yorntinak remained oblivious to the impending threat as Nicholas silently conjured a spell that would amplify the arrow's power.
Bubbleatrum,
he intoned sharply. In an instant, the arrow swelled to the size of a wagon, transforming into a formidable projectile. Before the dragon could react, the colossal arrow collided with its face, the impact sending the relentless beast reeling back in pain, disruptively shattering the gravity hold it had imposed on the battlefield. Seizing this precious moment of vulnerability, the soldiers below rallied, launching their assault on the dragon's exposed underbelly, a visceral opportunity they could not ignore. Captain Kroll led the charge with unyielding ferocity, hacking at the dragon's tough scales with all his might, wielding a great sword. Infuriated, the dragon regained its footing and unleashed a devastating swipe at the nearby soldiers, its claws raking through their ranks. Just then, a fireball spell erupted, crashing squarely into the dragon's back, drawing its furious gaze to the source of the attack. This moment of distraction created a crucial blind spot, precisely the opening Bukrock had been waiting for. With a fierce swing of his battle hammer, he struck at the dragon with bone-shattering force, channeling all his strength into the blow. Nicholas paused for a brief moment, a surge of relief flooding over his features as he watched over the fight.
It's working,
he murmured to himself, the glimmer of hope rising as the tide of battle began to shift in their favor. Bukrock sprang toward the dragon, intent on targeting its hind legs. Ice arrows rained down upon the beast's face, launched by a supporting mage, while Lieutenant Triggs led a ferocious offensive from the front. With his twin blades in hand, Triggs danced around the dragon's deadly strikes, deftly evading its lethal bites and slashes. The sight of fallen soldiers, turned to mere pulp, stirred a deep sorrow within Lieutenant Triggs. Seizing a moment of distraction, Bukrok prepared to strike. Yet, just before his blow would land, a searing pain gripped his heart. His body jerked as if controlled by some unseen force, and his hammer suddenly felt unnaturally heavy, causing him to drop it. Confusion enveloped him until he realized both spells faded and that this was the cost of using so much borrowed power. In that fleeting instant, the dragon caught sight of his vulnerable state and swatted him aside like a nuisance, sending him crashing through a series of buildings. Lying motionless, Bukrok became an inviting target, and the dragon resolved to eliminate the threat, once and for all. With a fearsome roar, Yorntichnak drew back for a devastating breath attack, but Jakwawe sprang into action, desperate to halt the impending doom. Out of arrows, the resourceful Alofrian resorted to unleashing feathers from his own body. A few found their mark in the dragon's eye, but Yorntichnak brushed off the discomfort with disdain. Jakwawe's instincts screamed of imminent peril as he felt the weight of danger loom overhead. Nicholas flew closer, invoking a protective barrier around Bukrok.
Denizara,
he said as he braced himself to renew the spell. Just as the dragon unleashed its torrent of purple energy, it redirected its gaze towards Nicholas, unleashing the beam at him instead. In that split second, Nicholas cast the barrier over himself.
Denizara!
He shouted, his instincts sharper this time. He knew how to focus better to survive. With the dragon's purple breath raging forth, its tail lashed against the barrier shielding Bukrok. Each assault sent tremors through the spell, and Jakwawe quickly realized the breath attack was merely a ruse. With a final strike, the barrier shattered, and the dragon's fierce tail aimed for the kill. Without a second thought, Jakwawe leaped into the path of destruction. The collision was catastrophic, bones cracking under the force. When Bukrok finally lifted his gaze, he found Jakwawe looming protectively over him, wounded and bloodied, with crumpled wings drooping at his sides.
Jakwawe? What?
Bukrok struggled to find his voice. Despite the blood trickling from his lips, Jakwawe managed a smile, his body trembling with agony.
You must survive,
he gasped, fighting to communicate. Just then, before Jakwawe could say anything else, a pair of immense jaws, lined with menacing jagged teeth, closed around him. A horrifying display of dominance erupted as blood splattered over Bukrok.
Jakwawe.
Bukrok breathed softly, still in disbelief at the sight before him. There stood Yorntichnak, wearing a smug expression as it methodically chewed. Enraged, Bukrok felt a fresh wave of anger surging within him as he struggled to rise, consumed by fury. Agonizing waves of pain coursed through his body as if it were rebelling against Bukrok's commands. Gritting his teeth, he battled through the agony, each throb intensifying his fury. With reckless abandon, he charged at the dragon, fists clenched and weapon absent. The dragon snarled, but instead of engaging, a smirk crept across its face.
Too predictable,
Yorntichnak declared, satisfaction evident in its voice. With a swift swipe of its claw, it tore a rift into the fabric of reality, opening a swirling rift of chaotic colors that tugged at Bukrok. Energy crackled like lightning, leaving the orc with no time to halt his advance. He stumbled forward and plummeted into the abyss.
No!
Nicholas shouted, desperation in his tone. He attempted to cast a halting spell, but it was futile. Bukrok vanished into the rift as it snapped shut. Frantically, Nicholas reached out for the fading mana, hoping to intervene, but a violent cough erupted from him, blood spilling forth. His body was nearing its limits, slowly deteriorating due to mana poisoning as he sacrificed his health for power. Inspecting his hands, he noticed new wrinkles forming and felt his face to discover more had appeared there as well.
No?
Nicholas gritted his teeth, despair replacing his earlier confidence.
I'm not finished yet. We need to win this battle.
The dragon diverted its focus to the sky, utterly disregarding the soldiers, Captain Kroll and Lieutenant Triggs, who fought desperately to maintain its attention, yet their efforts were in vain. Yorntinak noticed the spell formation materializing overhead. Unsure of what it signified, it chose to prepare against any unexpected attack. With a menacing snarl, it gathered its strength for a colossal purple mana blast, ready to annihilate everything in its path. Ethereal purple light emanated from its mouth, glowing more intensely than before, as it drew upon immense energy for its breath attack. The mages around the dragon panicked, and shot out whatever spells they could think of to stop it. As the spells hit the dragon's scales, they seemed to immediately dissipate. Snapping out of his shock, Nicholas's mind raced for a solution. He witnessed Captain Kroll and Lieutenant Triggs striking futilely at the dragon, feeling increasingly ignored. Suddenly, inspiration struck him. He aimed his staff at the two soldiers.
Bubelatrum!
Nicholas yelled, his voice strained and his throat slick with blood. In a desperate bout of coughing, he pressed on, and to his astonishment, the spell sparked to life. Suddenly, Lieutenant Triggs and Captain Kroll's bodies swelled to nearly a third of the dragon's size. They exchanged bewildered glances, acknowledging each other with a nod of understanding. Lieutenant Triggs bent down, presenting his back to his commander, while Captain Kroll dashed forward, leaping off Triggs' back to confront the dragon's glowing snout. With a powerful upward strike, he managed to deflect the ominous breath attack away from the mages hovering above, redirecting it toward the far-off mountains, the dwarves' territory. The resulting explosion sent ripples of shock through the ground. As the ritual spell above reached completion, the rift pulsated rhythmically, reminiscent of a heartbeat. With each pulse, the chaotic mana began retracting into the rift. Yorntinak let out a frustrated snarl, finally realizing the creature's intentions. The dragon's once vibrant scales began to fade, its connection to the mortal realm slipping away. Its massive form twisted and struggled as it was pulled toward the rift. In a final act of defiance, the dragon lashed out with its claws, unleashing 3 malevolent energy waves targeting Nicholas. Grounded and unable to escape, Nicholas's body throbbed with pain. The clone above him already dissipated, leaving him to control the spell formation solo. The mages in the air provided a framework, and he had to direct their collective power like a skilled conductor. Captain Kroll attempted to shield Nicholas from the strikes with his giant form, but as one wave struck him, he vanished without a trace. Fear gripped his troops as they realized their commander had disappeared. With 2 more deadly energy attacks barreling toward Nicholas, Lieutenant Triggs rushed to emulate Kroll's brave move, trying to intercept both incoming hits. His efforts proved futile. He too vanished just as swiftly, leaving the final wave hurtling toward Nicholas. Yorntinak's grin widened in satisfaction while Nicholas's heart raced, frantically working to expedite the spell. Then, out of nowhere, an Alophrian woman appeared, shoving Nicholas aside and sacrificing herself in the process. Confused, Nicholas glanced up, ready to express his gratitude, but she had already disappeared. Frustration twisted Yorntinak's face as it turned its attention to the castle. Alarm surged through Nicholas. The mages who had been idle rushed to shield the castle with their bodies, prepared to give their lives for its protection. But instead of unleashing the expected breath attack, the dragon spoke, its calm demeanor sending shockwaves of panic through everyone.
En thro reg I fidtran, dala kumanud, quali drong.
Yorntinak intoned, and as it finished, it cast a final look at Nicholas while being pulled into the rift. Suddenly, Nicholas' face twisted in fear. In an instant, the colossal rift in the sky sealed shut. It was over. The soldiers on the battlefield, although mourning, began to cheer, a battle cry for victory, as if all their sacrifices paid off. The only one not cheering was Nicholas. Nicholas crumpled to the ground as the relentless mana poisoning overwhelmed him. In an instant, he felt his body age, his strength evaporating like mist. As he lay there, the dragon's final words reverberated through his thoughts.
I leave you a parting gift, mage. You'll understand soon enough.
Those words sent a shiver down his spine, but he felt too weak to unravel their significance. What mattered most at that moment was the city. Though ravaged, it was safe for now.